Hey everyone, it is Thursday, and that means it is time for this week's Track Conversations. I am Monina Wagner. I'm the community manager at CMI. We use these live streams for us to take a closer look at the awesome sessions that we had at Content Marketing World. Content Marketing World, we were talking about it 3 months ago. That is so crazy. We miss you guys so much, and we cannot wait to see you again coming up here in 2021. So today we are covering the writing and content development track. Moderating the conversation today will be the Vice President of Content, that is Kim Moutsos. Kim, welcome. It's so good to see you.
Oh, hi, Monina. It's great to be here with everybody.
Now, Kim, I can't say it enough. It's been great to be able to host these discussions every week because it's really good to see each other, as I said, but it kind of gives me that nudge that I need to finish watching the sessions from last year.
Yeah, same for me. And I loved all the sessions in this track, so it should be a good discussion today.
And I know that you have completely been watching. I mean, you have watched all of the sessions. I have to catch up to where you are.
I mean, I definitely have not watched them all. It's really so much, but you know, I can't wait to get through more.
Well, I know you have a lot to talk about with the speakers, but before I introduce them, I was kind of wondering, is there an overarching theme for this track that we should be looking out for? What has been your biggest takeaway watching them?
I think a theme that really stood out to me, and I have to give a hat tip to Ahava for this because it's right in the title of her presentation, is respect. It's really about earning respect by being a competent and more than competent, an accomplished storyteller. That means part of it is hitting your deadlines, getting your facts straight, and telling fantastic stories. And once you've done that, and here's a nod to Michelle, and we can talk more about this in a little bit, you can use that evidence of your talent and your craft and your knowledge to really use the respect that you've earned. And I think we'll be talking about that, the reason why each of these things in this track are important is more than just to be a good writer. It's so that the writing craft that you've honed can be put to use in service of, good things. But also that you then become a trusted resource for other people on the team in terms of how to tell a great story, how to move an audience, how to actually use your writing to accomplish the business goals that we're all trying to hit.
See, that sounds so fantastic that I am looking forward to this discussion today. Joining us today are 3 of the track speakers. Of course, we have my friend, and that is Ann Gynn. Hi, Ann.
Hello.
This is Ahava Leibtag. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, Michelle Park Lazette. Hello, hello. Now, we have Ann and Ahava, me and Michelle, we're all on Eastern Standard Time. We have Kim, who is on the West Coast. And unfortunately, our other track speaker, who is Jonathan Crossfield, he is based in Australia, and he was unable to join us today. But no matter where you're watching from, we would love if you could leave any questions for the speakers in our comments. We will try to get to all of them. Also, if you had any insights or any tidbits that you really loved from the sessions, also leave those in the comments. And while I'm at it, this is a new format for us for conversations. And we want to know if you love them, if you hate them, if you want to see any changes for them. So give me a shout on those too, okay? And with that, I am going to hand the reins over to my friend, Kim.
All right, thanks, Mo. I think I'm going to just make a segue from what I had just been talking about and turn to you first, Michelle. I'd love to talk to you about this idea of wielding that respect. I know in your session, you called it defending the craft, and I really appreciated that section. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that and really sort of elaborate on the angles and techniques that you've had success with in terms of, those situations where you really need to convince somebody, listen, as you said in your presentation, I've been trained to do this. I have a track record of success in doing this. This is why you need to trust me.
Yeah, and I, can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm on my iPhone because, of course, technology failed me this happy day. So, defense of the craft occurs to me because I think very often in organizations. Well, let me start with this. It didn't used to be that I worked with anyone other than writers and editors and designers and photographers, because I come from a newsroom background. And so in that environment, it was always understood that some of us, most of us, pursued some kind of education in this craft of storytelling and communicating. We had experience in it. And so then fast forward to 2014, I joined an organization which is terrific and it works for the American public, and I am proud to work here. And what I find, though, is it's sort of like agency life as I understand it. We're working with economists and bank examiners and others who have goals for communicating, but maybe don't do the work day in and day out. And so I stress diplomacy. I don't think that conversation where anyone who has a expertise purports to know everything about the things that we want to do and the audiences we want to reach. I don't think that those kinds of conversations go well for any of us. But I do think it makes a lot of sense for you as a writer in the room, or you as a photographer or a graphic designer, to identify the reasons why you're arguing for a certain type of approach, the reasons stories may make more sense than other approaches, and to again, find the diplomatic way of making your argument and of sticking to that argument where it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great take. And I know that sometimes one way that you can sort of get people on the same page is to remind them of the shared goal. What are we trying to do with this piece of content? We're trying to get someone to have a specific reaction or take a specific action, and then sort of work from the same page. Ann or Ahava, do you have any similar experiences or thoughts on how to go about defending the craft or wielding your respect as a writer, your earned respect?
No, I work with doctors, so I never had that experience.
Yeah, isn't it showing, right?
I'll just say quickly that, doctors and academics really pride themselves on evidence-based medicine, practicing evidence-based medicine. And so I talk about evidence-based marketing and just using data to guide decisions. I also am a big believer in preparing before a project is done. So if you don't set the expectation of what you're trying to accomplish, you're going to get involved in the creative process way too fast in order to prepare the stakeholders for what they're doing. So I think it's like, the respectful conversation and, like Michelle said, really thinking through not just what are we trying to accomplish, but what does the audience really need from us, and really getting the stakeholders inside the hearts and the minds of what they're looking at. Now, I'm lucky because we're doing healthcare. So, it's a little bit easier to make that argument. I always wonder, how does somebody in plumbing supplies handle that? Or, other types of industries which may seem more boring or not as, heartfelt. Or so I'm always curious about how people like that handle that kind of stakeholder project, or in, deep research think tank type of organizations. But for healthcare, as long as we do that prep beforehand, and as long as we have data to explain why we're doing what we're doing, we usually can be pretty successful.
Actually, I think, Ann, I know you'll have something to say on this a little bit later, but Ahava, something that you said triggered for me another point from your own presentation, where you talked about the von Restorf effect. And the example that you gave, the von Restorf effect, I'll let you do a better description of it, but is essentially that sort of phenomenon of noticing the thing that sticks out because it's different or it's unexpected. The example that you gave came from MoonPie's social media account, and they did sort of a flow chart of how you would figure out what flavor of moon pie you would eat. And, you mentioned that's very unusual because why does anyone need help figuring out what kind of moon pie they like? But I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the von Restorf effect, what you've been able to do to find the way to create the thing that stands out as different for a good reason for people to notice. And then I am going to go to Ann because I have a related example that she shared with us that you'll all see tomorrow that I want to talk about. So first, Ahava, I'll let you answer the question.
Oh, man. So the von Restorf effect is basically which one of these things doesn't belong, and that people seem to notice that. I think from a neuroscience and evolutionary survival perspective, we always want to notice what isn't there more than we notice what is there. And in fact, there's, they talk about something like, the majority of accidents happen 5 minutes from home because people are so ingrained in the way that they drive home that the von Restorf effect doesn't always happen to them because they're so, tuned out. Oh, I'm 5 minutes from home. I know exactly how to get there. So I think that in marketing, it can be a valuable thing to use that. And then it can also be dangerous to use that, particularly in sensitive areas like healthcare. So one of the ways that I sort of try to get my writers to not do those kinds of things that I think are insensitive is they'll write content like, we provide a comprehensive approach to heart transplant surgery. And I'm like, no, we don't provide a comprehensive approach. We just implant your heart and then we let you work it out. It's kind of the opposite type of thing. And I'm just speaking from a healthcare perspective that sometimes you can use it and it can be really valuable and I think it can be really fun. But other times I think marketers try to take advantage of things like that because they know that game. It's kind of like people who use too many animations in PowerPoint. It's like, okay, we get it. You figured out how to use an animation. You don't need to use one on every slide. And then it can sort of come across as insensitive. So I think it's a very valuable tactic to use. I just think that in my line of work, you have to be particularly careful about using it. And you also have to sometimes do the opposite, which is not to talk about the table stakes types of things and not to fall back on those words, but to really sort of think about what does a person really, really need to hear now that's going to fit into their mental model of what they're expecting when they sort of start on this journey or continue on this journey, journey isn't a word that I really love, but we only have marketers to blame for ruining it.
Well, I think also The Bachelor maybe also ruined that word.
Yeah.
I don't watch that show, but I do read about it sometimes. But Ahava, something that you said stood out to me. I know you mentioned feeling like you're not using the von Restorf effect when you push back about using clear language, which I know is another passion of yours. Yeah. But in a way, sometimes using clear language is the thing that stands out, right? When you're used to hearing legalese, jargon, marketing blather, as I might call it, and then you see something that's just written in clear, understandable English, it's like a breath of fresh air. And that is the thing that stands out because it's so different. So I really just wanted to reinforce all the things that you've said in your session and in articles on our site that we can certainly share maybe in the chat about clear language and the importance of it.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing very quickly about that. At the beginning of the COVID, whatever we are calling this, the pandemic, I started to see what people were writing and it just horrified me. And so we created 2 plain language cheat sheets for healthcare communicators on terms that people were using that, people weren't familiar with or didn't understand. And the CDC says that a pandemic is just as much a communications crisis as it is a health emergency. And I've actually done studies where I've looked at the language that English-speaking countries used, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, their health departments on how they communicated with people about the virus versus the different states and how we communicated about the virus in the CDC. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that there's a correlation to plain language. So you're absolutely right. The von Restorf effect is there. Unfortunately, it bit us. So yeah, just try to keep away from those empty words as much as you can. You prove your efficacy as a marketer when you get people to act on what you've written, not when you fill up a page with words.
Absolutely. I think every single one of us on this call and probably listening would agree with that. And I'm going to turn to you for a second because you and I have talked this week about that sort of great example of a social media account that stood out, which was the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. And this comes back to Ahava's point about, the von Restorf effect. If you sat down to think about what the social media account for a sewer district might be like, or if you follow, for some reason, other sewer districts on social media, you would never expect what the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District is doing on social media. So I just wanted to ask you about that, because obviously I've been chuckling about it all week.
Yeah, it's a great account. I know Michelle's familiar with it too. So Cleveland's in Northeast Ohio for the rest of the world who's trying to figure out for the sewer district aspect. And they have such a distinct voice. First of all, it's a topic, obviously, wastewater and sewers, and nobody cares about until there's a problem, certainly. But the account has its own really cult following from it. And it's got such a distinct voice in the writing that is not government whatsoever. If I just showed you the tweets without saying who was doing it, you would be surprised that it's government doing it and taking a topic that isn't interesting. And really, they, through humor and wry observations, they really also are educating you at the same time, whether you realize it or not. So it's a great example of an account. I think we're going to dig a little deeper with them, but they it's a sense of humor, which of course I think you need with wastewater and sewers to come through. But too many times you're not allowed to have that sense of humor because the people who are the leading it think it's a serious business, which it is, but they don't understand the value of humor in all of it.
I just want to point out that I talked about plumbing and Ann talked about wastewater.
Yeah, I will say, Ahava, that definitely reminded me of it. And if you're all interested in this account, you'll read a teeny bit about it tomorrow morning on our website, the Content Marketing Institute blog, where our weekly wrap gives one small example of what they're doing. But definitely go and take a look. It'll brighten your week.
Yes,
in a surprising way. So, Ann, sticking with you for a minute, I wanted to ask you about. I think this is tied into a lot of things that we've been talking about. You suggest, and I know you do yourself, so much pre-work before you ever sit down to write. And a lot of that pre-work has to do with making sure you understand the goal, making sure you understand the expectations, making sure that you have your subject matter experts lined up, and that you get very organized in your process. How much time do you personally spend on the pre-work part of writing? And I don't mean hours, but like percentage. And are there certain projects that you do that require less pre-work? Do you cheat your process every now and then? I ask this knowing that other people don't know, but Ann is for sure one of the fastest writers I've ever worked with. And, not just fast, but turning out a fantastic product at the same time. So listen to her. She knows what she's talking about.
I'm just going to carry you around with me.
Or out.
From that. So as far as the pre-work that I do, it really depends on the piece. If I'm writing for a client that's in the healthcare space or a space I'm not as familiar with, I'm doing more research and trying to ramp up. When I'm writing for the Content Marketing Institute, I've been doing it for a while, so I have that cheat sheet to go to, right? I know I know the audience. I know what I'm supposed to be doing to reach the audience. I know what the business goals are. So that's kind of ingrained. And I think the more you're writing for either a topic or for your company or a specific client, it gets quicker from that. But I think it's just basic stuff so when I sit down to write, I really want to have everything there that I think I'm going to need. I want to have the information. And so when I start writing, I then will realize the holes, right? I think I have everything and I think I've done everything. And then I discover I don't. And that's okay. But I keep writing and I just highlight where the holes are into it and then kind of go back to fill in that. But the more you do something, the fewer holes you're going to have in it. And one other thing, I think it starts really creating what the vision of the story is. And I had a professor at Ohio University who's now at Iowa State, Michael Bouget, who always said, "What's the story about?" And then you'd answer, so the story is about the sewer system. We'll keep our favorite topic for today. But what's the story really about? Well, it's really about how the sewer system is an integral into people's lives or something like that, or how people's lives are affected by it. And that's where you get, by asking that next question, that's when you usually get to the story. The other's just surface level. And I think that pre-work of really getting to what the story is about makes the writing process much easier.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think all of us here have had some sort of journalism training, at least in our careers. You know, the thing that I have encountered too is people saying, how would you explain this to your neighbor? Like, how would you explain to your neighbor what's important about this story? And that really gives you that sort of nut graph, right? That like essential thing that the story is actually truly about. And I think once you have, I know for me in my writing process, which don't laugh, Ann, but if I can get that distilled essence of what the story is really about, that makes the writing much easier for me. And
you can't, then you don't know what the story is about. You're never going to succeed.
That's exactly
you can't write that sentence. You are going to spend hours, and we all have different processes and wrangling for that. But that's the key to, if you're going to have any success, you got to be able to write that sentence. Whether you use it in the story or not, you've got to be able to write what it's about in a sentence.
That's exactly right. And I think that, you know, something that we've all experienced on this call too, brings me back to something Michelle talked about in her presentation, which was to think of feedback as a gift, right? This sort of notion that you kick around a story with somebody and even a draft with somebody, and you accept that your first draft isn't necessarily the best draft, right? Michelle, I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit, this idea that feedback is a gift. And before I turn it over to you, I just want to say that having worked with people who are professional writers, who have a journalism background, or who really have come to content marketing from a writing background, they get this, right? When I run into people who don't like to be edited, it's often people who are coming at it from another field and they don't understand that sort of give and take process of writing. So Michelle, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what that must be like for you in, you know, you're working for a government regulated, you know, government agency situation. And I would imagine feedback is sometimes a fraught experience in your day-to-day life.
I just want to say goodbye before you talk. I'm really sorry. Unfortunately, I had another meeting at this time. But it was wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. And I could talk about this all day. So thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us, Ahava.
Absolutely, absolutely. Take care.
Take care.
Yeah, so I do work for the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. The Federal Reserve is actually quasi-governmental, which means that you know, we're intentionally kept separate from government and from politics for a good reason. You don't want long-term economic policy made with short-term goals or motivations in mind. I should say, since every dutiful Federal Reserve staffer does, that these views today are my own and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland or the Federal Reserve System. You know, I'll back it up just a moment and say that I used to be very guilty of not seeing feedback as a gift. You know, in the newsroom, I used to sometimes have 45 minutes to write a story or a week to write a story. And that doesn't give you a whole lot of time for someone to say, you know, I really think that you need to rewrite this entire piece. And these are the reasons why. And even if those are valid reasons, you're still under deadline in the newspaper journalism world. What coming inside has actually done for me, and this is a surprise, I'll be honest, is it's given me time to breathe and it's given me time to be developed. And so, whereas I used to think as a journalist, as a young and a mid-level, you know, 10-year interims journalist, I used to hang my hat to determine my success based on how few came back to me on a writing assignment. I no longer think that way. I think, you know, if I haven't asked, you know, an editor and subject matter experts and a diverse crew of people to read and give me their constructive criticism, then I know that that product, if it's not undergoing some sort of massive feedback cycle, it may not be the very best that it can be for the audience, because it doesn't really happen that the very first video we shoot, or the very first logo we design, or the very first story we write meets all of the expectations, answers all of the questions that our audiences have. And that's why feedback is a gift. The more eyes on something, the more voices back to me, the better able I am to say, okay, then, you know, if this audience is going to ask this, then we need to prepare and we need to revise. And so I have grown a lot, actually, by coming to what they call the dark side. And by that, I mean, you know, the corporate communications side, in that I've had time to really begin to appreciate that feedback makes me a better writer and a better communicator, and just all around a better colleague.
I think those are really great points. And I think too, it helps to have the maturity and the, you know, experience over time that lets you evaluate feedback. I mean, I think there is a point where content by committee can actually diminish the quality of the piece if there isn't a gatekeeper who's sort of evaluating, you know, which feedback needs to be acted on and which, you know, might be worth considering, but ultimately, as you had said before, you know, you're defending the craft because you know from experience what will actually work in a piece and what won't.
And I will be the first to say, and if anyone from my bank were on this this live event, they'd be nodding, saying, "Yep, I've heard her say this." I am the first to say, at a certain point, the pursuit of perfection becomes the enemy of progress. And so, you know, like, you have to determine how much feedback is enough. And again, you do have to defend the craft. So there are certain things that I do. I listen to a podcast religiously about writing fiction. And one of the things that podcaster said is, you know, look for consensus. So if you have 2 people or 3 people who are editing and trying to give you that gift of feedback, and one of them says something and you disagree, right? Because you're one of the minds that gets to determine what this piece should ultimately be. But if maybe you don't decide to make the change, maybe you don't take their feedback to heart. But if it's, you know, I look for consensus. So 2 or 3 people saying the same thing gets my attention.
I think that's great. Obviously, I could talk to both of you all day long. I would imagine that we're probably running to a little bit longer than we expected. So I'll just quickly ask one last question with a nod to Jonathan, whose track was about fact checking. In our theme of respect, I think one of the things writers can do to really earn the respect of their editors and get the kind of feedback that's constructive and not just irritating is to be a good fact checker. But I just wanted to toss it out to both of you and say, you know, what do you feel like is the responsibility of the writer in terms of fact checking? Do we rely on our writers to get the facts right the first time, or do you see it really as a shared responsibility among writer, editor, etc.? Anne, I'll let you answer that one first.
It's the writer's responsibility. That doesn't mean that the writer's perfect and that no one else should be in the process. But if you're delivering something and you're like, oh, well, they'll look it up, that's not the right way to write it. It's not the right way to earn respect. If I'm in the editing role and I'm having to look up information and finding the writer has given me incorrect or misleading on date, whatever it is, I'm not really eager to continue editing their work or to hire them again or whatever it is. I think it doesn't absolve everyone else in the process from making sure, because mistakes happen. But particularly in this day and age, there aren't enough levels of review and editors from a fact-checking standpoint that you can just forego it. You know, there's only one publication I know that's still out there making fact-checking calls from that to verify things. So I think from the moment that you start writing and complete it is to make sure you have all your facts in order. Otherwise, you know, don't submit it.
Michelle, is that kind of how you view the process too?
100%. You know, the writer, the creator has to take personal accountability. I wrote a 3-part manufacturing series that I think surpassed 7,000 words. There's no way that I expected anyone but me to make sure that someone's title was correct, to make sure I was quoting them accurately, to make sure that, you know, the way I characterize nuance to manufacturing and the things that that industry has experienced was correct. The other thing I'll note, in addition to the fact that, okay, so Amy, you're right. Excuse me, Ann, you're right. There are fewer fact checkers. I'm actually interested to know what organization still does that. I'll pause.
It's Cleveland Magazine.
Oh, cool. My sister actually works for the Cleveland Magazine, so I'm proud to say that I'm hearing this today. One of the other considerations, bear in mind though, because as a young journalist working in Pennsylvania newsrooms and Ohio newsrooms, I was always told, just remember, you get something wrong, it's not just your editors who might be frustrated. You have 70,000 readers who will keep you accountable, who will take you to task for getting something wrong. I'll point out that in today's digital landscape where, you know, you might have, I don't know if you're lucky, hundreds, thousands, millions of readers, each of those people is someone who may know the facts of a situation. And if you get them wrong, it's a reputational risk for both you and your organization.
Yeah.
And that is why you both have earned the respect of everyone you work with and are able to defend the craft so effectively. So Mo, I think we're probably out of time, so I welcome you back on to wrap us up. But I want to thank everyone for listening to this discussion so far, and both of you for participating. It was a lot of fun for me.
Thank you.
And it was a wonderful discussion. Big kudos to Kim for being a fantastic moderator. I want to say thank you to Ann and to Michelle and of course Ahava for being with us today. And a huge thank you to all of you who are out there, took some time out of your busy schedules to be able to sit and join us. Next week, we will be back and we are talking about the SEO track. So same time, same place. Also, I'm Monita Wagner. So be safe, take care of one another, and we'll see you next week.